You mean nothing to me, he said on our wedding night, and somehow that hurt less than the silence that followed. The chandelier above us shimmered like frozen stars, casting soft gold light across a room that didn't feel like mine, a room that smelled faintly of expensive cologne and something colder, something untouchable. My heels sank slightly into the thick ivory carpet as I stood there in a dress that probably cost more than my entire life back in Brooklyn, my fingers still trembling from the weight of the ring he had slid onto my hand exactly 3 hours ago. I had imagined my wedding night once, in a way every girl does, something warm, something uncertain but hopeful, but nothing about this felt like hope. It felt like a contract, a transaction sealed under chandeliers and quiet threats. Adrian Volkov didn't even look at me when he said it. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, his reflection faint against the glass overlooking a skyline I barely recognized, like the city itself had shifted into something sharper, more dangerous. 12 stories below, headlights moved in silent lines, and I realized how far I was from anything familiar, from the cramped two-bedroom apartment where my father used to promise me things would get better, from the chipped kitchen table where everything had started to fall apart. 48 hours ago, I was still Emily Carter, working double shifts, counting every dollar, pretending the overdue notices didn't scare me. Then the door slammed. Not a knock, not a warning, just a sound that split my world in half. I remember the way the air changed first, heavy, like a storm had walked into the room before the men did. 3 of them, all in dark suits that didn't wrinkle, didn't bend, like they were built for a different kind of life than mine. And then him. Adrian didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Power doesn't need volume. It just needs presence. My father tried to speak, tried to stand, but I saw it in his eyes before the words even came out. Fear. Not the kind you hide. The kind that settles into your bones. There are 2 ways to settle a debt, Adrian said, his voice calm, almost bored, like he'd had this conversation 100 times before. Money, or something of equal value. I didn't understand at first. I thought maybe there was a number, something impossible, but still a number. I was wrong. His eyes found mine, steady, unreadable, like he had already decided something I hadn't even begun to question. Her, he said simply. Just one word. That was all it took. The room went silent in a way I had never felt before, like even the air was waiting. My father said my name like a warning, like a plea, like he could still protect me if he tried hard enough. But we both knew he couldn't. Not from this. Not from him. I should have said no. I should have run. But there are moments in life where the choice isn't really a choice at all. It's a calculation. And I did the math in seconds. Debt. Eviction. The look in my father's eyes. And the man standing in front of me who didn't look like someone you refused. I'll do it. I heard myself say, my voice steadier than I felt. Adrian tilted his head slightly, like he was studying something unexpected, something mildly interesting. Good, he said. That was it. No smile. No satisfaction. Just finality. And now here I was, standing in a room that echoed with everything I didn't understand, married to a man who had just told me I meant nothing. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the edge of my dress as I finally found my voice. Then why did you marry me? The question hung there, fragile, dangerous. Adrian didn't answer right away. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting mine for the first time that night, and for a split second, something flickered there. Not warmth. Not kindness. Something else. Something I couldn't name. Because, he said quietly, stepping closer, close enough that I could feel the space between us shift, nothing is sometimes the safest thing you can be. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't just a marriage. It was a warning. The door clicked shut behind him, soft but final, like a period at the end of a sentence I did not remember writing. And for a long moment I just stood there, listening to the quiet hum of a place that did not feel like home, my pulse loud in my ears, my thoughts louder, replaying his words over and over again because nothing is sometimes the safest thing you can be did not sound like cruelty, not entirely. It sounded like a warning dressed up as indifference. And that was somehow worse because it meant there was something I did not understand yet, something I was already standing in the middle of without knowing the rules. I moved slowly, the fabric of my dress whispering against the floor as I crossed the room, each step careful like I was testing the ground beneath me, like it might give way if I moved too fast. And when I reached the window, I saw my reflection first before the city, pale, unfamiliar, a stranger wearing diamonds that were never meant for her. And I wondered if this was what he saw when he looked at me. Not a person, but a piece in a game I had never agreed to play. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed, footsteps echoing briefly before fading. And it hit me then that this place was not empty, not quiet. It was watched, controlled, every movement accounted for in ways I could not see yet. And I felt it in the way the air sat heavier on my skin, like the walls themselves were listening. I reached for the necklace at my throat out of habit, only to remember I was not wearing it, that everything familiar had been taken off me piece by piece before I walked down that aisle, replaced with things that glittered but did not belong to me, and the absence of it felt louder than any sound in the room. I should have been angry, I thought. I should have been breaking something, screaming, demanding answers. But the truth was I was too tired for that, too aware that anger would not change anything here, not with him, not with a man who could stand 10 feet away and make a room feel smaller without raising his voice. I turned when I heard the handle move again, my breath catching before I could stop it, and Adrian stepped back inside like he had never left, his expression the same, unreadable, composed, like whatever thoughts he carried never reached the surface. He glanced at me once, quick, assessing, and then toward the table near the wall where a single glass of water sat, untouched, like it had been placed there before I even knew I would need it. "You should drink something," he said, his tone even, almost indifferent, but there was something deliberate in it, like every word he chose had already been weighed. I did not move right away. "Do you always give orders like that?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended, but steady enough to hold. He paused, just slightly, and that was the first crack I saw, small but real, like I had said something he did not expect. "Only when it matters," he replied, and the way he said it made my chest tighten because it did not sound like control, it sounded like calculation, like he was already thinking 3 steps ahead of something I could not see. I walked to the table then, more to prove I could than because I was thirsty, my fingers brushing the cool glass before I lifted it, the water steady even if I was not, and when I took a sip, it grounded me in a way I did not expect, simple, real, something that belonged to me in a room full of things that did not. "You said I am nothing," I said after a moment, setting the glass down carefully, turning back to face him because I needed to understand the rules if I was going to survive this. "But you are watching me like I am something." Silence stretched between us again, thinner this time, sharper, and Adrian's gaze held mine longer than before, not cold exactly, but not warm either, something in between that felt more dangerous because it meant he was deciding something, changing something, right in front of me. "You are alive," he said finally, his voice lower now, quieter, like the room itself needed to hear less. "And right now, that is what matters." It was not the answer I wanted, but it was the first honest thing he had given me, and as I stood there in a dress that was never meant for love, in a marriage that felt more like a shield than a promise, I realized something I could not unthink. This was not about what I meant to him. Not yet. This was about what the world would do if it decided I meant anything at all. I did not sleep that night, not really. I just lay there staring at a ceiling that looked too perfect to belong to a life like mine, tracing the delicate patterns in the plaster as if they might rearrange themselves into something I could understand. But nothing changed. Not the room, not the silence, not the man standing somewhere behind the walls of this place making decisions I would feel long before I ever heard them. And sometime around 3 in the morning, when the city below had quieted into distant hums and scattered headlights, I realized something that made my chest tighten. I was not here by accident, not even as collateral. I was here because he chose me. And that meant there was a reason, whether I liked it or not. The sun had barely started to rise when I finally sat up, the pale light spilling through the tall windows and painting everything in soft gray, stripping away the illusion of gold and luxury and leaving something colder underneath, something more real, and I moved carefully out of the bed, my bare feet meeting the cool floor as I walked toward the door, hesitating for just a second before turning the handle, half expecting it to be locked, half expecting this entire place to remind me that I did not belong anywhere except where I was told to stand. But it opened easily, too easily, and that unsettled me more than if it had not. The hallway outside stretched long and quiet, lined with doors that all looked the same, each one closed, each one hiding something I did not know. And I stepped forward slowly, the sound of my footsteps softer than I expected, like even the house itself was trained not to echo too loudly, not to reveal too much. And that was when I noticed him, standing at the far end near a wide window that overlooked the front drive, his posture straight, still, like he had been there for hours, like he had never moved at all. Adrian did not turn right away, but I knew he had heard me. There was no way he had not, and after a few seconds, he spoke without looking back, his voice calm, measured, like every word had already been decided before I arrived. You should not walk around alone yet. The word yet caught my attention more than anything else, because it meant this was temporary, this invisible line I was not supposed to cross, and I took another step forward anyway, ignoring the way my heart picked up just slightly. You said I am safe, I replied, my voice steady even if my thoughts were not. So why does it feel like I am not allowed to exist outside one room? He turned then, slowly, his eyes finding mine with that same unreadable expression, but this time there was something sharper behind it, something that looked almost like restraint. Safe does not mean free, he said, and the simplicity of it hit harder than anything else he had told me so far, because it sounded like a rule, not just for me, but for him too. I crossed my arms without thinking, grounding myself in something familiar, something small but mine. Then what am I here? I asked, not raising my voice, not challenging, just needing to understand the shape of the cage I had stepped into. His gaze lingered on me for a second longer than before, then shifted past me down the hallway, like he was checking something I could not see. Always checking, always calculating. And when he looked back, his answer came quieter, lower, like it was not meant for anyone else. You are a name on a paper that makes certain people hesitate. I frowned, the words settling into place slowly, uneasily. So I am a shield. Adrian did not deny it. He did not confirm it either, but the silence between us was answer enough. I let out a slow breath, nodding once, more to myself than to him, because it made sense in a way I did not want it to, and it also meant something else, something more dangerous than I had considered before. And what happens, I asked carefully, if they decide not to hesitate? That was the first time his expression changed in a way I could actually see, not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me. A slight tightening around his eyes, a pause that lasted half a second too long, and when he spoke again, his voice was colder, more certain, like a line had just been drawn somewhere I could not see. Then I make sure they remember why they should. The air between us shifted again, heavier, more defined, and for the first time since this all began, I felt it clearly, not just the control, not just the distance, but the weight of something else entirely, something that did not fit into simple words like nothing or safe or deal, something that felt like a promise I had not asked for and could not walk away from. And as I stood there in a house that was starting to feel less like a prison and more like the center of something I did not understand, I realized the truth I had been circling since the moment he walked into my life. I was not just inside his world now. I was part of the reason it had just changed. The rest of that morning unfolded in a strange kind of quiet, the kind that did not feel peaceful but controlled, like every second was being measured by someone other than me. And I found myself following an unspoken path through the house, guided more by instinct than permission, past wide hallways and rooms that looked untouched, like they existed only to impress people who were never really meant to live in them, until I reached a space that felt different, warmer somehow, a kitchen filled with soft light and the faint smell of coffee, real coffee, not the kind I used to make in a chip machine back in Brooklyn, but something richer, smoother, something that made me pause in the doorway without realizing it. A woman stood by the counter, older, maybe in her 50s, her movements calm and practiced as she poured a cup, and when she noticed me, her expression softened in a way that caught me off guard, like I was not just another shadow passing through this place. You must be Emily, she said gently, her voice carrying a warmth I had not heard since all of this began, and I nodded, unsure how to respond to kindness in a place that felt built on control. I am Maria, she added, placing the cup down and gesturing toward the table. You should eat something. It was the second time in less than 12 hours someone had told me that, but this time it did not feel like an order. It felt like care, and I stepped inside slowly, my guard still up, but not as sharp, not as defensive as it had been before. The chair felt solid beneath me as I sat, grounding in a way I did not expect. And for a moment, I let myself breathe, really breathe, as I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, the heat seeping into my fingers like a reminder that not everything here was cold. "Do you work for him?" I asked after a moment, my voice quieter now, more curious than confrontational, and Maria smiled faintly, not offended, not surprised. "I have been here a long time," she said simply, which did not answer my question, but somehow told me enough, that this place had history, that Adrian's world was not something that appeared overnight. It was something built slowly, carefully, with people who stayed. I looked down at the coffee, watching the steam curl upward, and something about it made me think of mornings before all of this, before contracts and decisions, and words that carried too much weight. And I wondered if those versions of me still existed somewhere, or if they had been left behind the moment I said yes. "He is not what you think," Maria said suddenly, and I glanced up, caught off guard by the certainty in her voice, by the way she spoke like she had seen something I had not yet had the chance to understand. "I do not know what to think," I admitted, because it was the truth, because nothing about Adrian Volkov fit into anything I understood, not the way he spoke, not the way he watched, not even the way he chose silence over explanation. Maria studied me for a second, then nodded, like that answer made sense, like confusion was expected here. "That is safer," she said quietly, echoing his words in a way that made my chest tighten again. And before I could ask what she meant, the sound of footsteps reached us from the hallway, steady, deliberate, and I did not need to turn to know who it was. The air shifted before he even entered, that same invisible pressure settling into the room, not loud, not overwhelming, just enough to remind everyone exactly where they stood. Adrian stopped just inside the doorway, his gaze moving from Maria to me, quick but thorough, like he was checking something, confirming something, and when his eyes met mine, there was a flicker of something I could not quite read, something that disappeared almost as soon as it appeared. "You left your room," he said, not accusing, not surprised, just stating a fact, and I held his gaze this time, refusing to look away first. "The door was not locked," I replied, and there was a quiet challenge in my voice, not enough to start something, but enough to show him I was not just going to stand still and follow every invisible line he drew. A small pause followed, one that felt heavier than it should have, and then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but not nothing either. "No," he said, his voice low, measured. "It was not." And for the first time since all of this began, I realized that maybe the lines in this place were not as fixed as I thought. Maybe some of them were waiting to see if I would cross them, and that possibility, quiet and dangerous, settled somewhere deep in my chest as I took another sip of coffee and tried to understand what it meant to live in a world where even freedom felt like a test. The silence after his words did not feel empty. It felt intentional, like he had placed something between us and was waiting to see what I would do with it. And I realized then that every interaction with Adrian Volkov was like that. Not just conversation but observation, like he was studying reactions instead of listening to answers. And I was not sure yet if that made me a guest in this house or something closer to a variable he had not finished calculating. Maria moved quietly behind me, setting a plate on the table with a gentle clink that broke the tension just enough to let me breathe again. And I glanced down at it. Toast, eggs, something simple but carefully arranged, and the normalcy of it felt almost surreal in a place that had already shifted my life so completely in less than 2 days. "Eat," she said softly, and this time I did not hesitate, picking up the fork more for the grounding than the hunger, because the act itself reminded me that I was still in control of something, even if it was small, even if it was just choosing to take a bite. Adrian did not sit. He remained by the doorway, one hand resting lightly against the frame, his posture relaxed in a way that looked effortless but was probably anything but, and I could feel his attention on me even when I did not look up, steady, quiet, constant, like a presence that did not need to announce itself. "You should get used to this," he said after a moment, his tone neutral, but the words carried weight I could not ignore. I paused mid-motion, setting the fork down slowly before meeting his gaze again. "To what exactly?" I asked, because I was starting to understand that nothing he said here was ever just one thing. His eyes held mine, calm, unreadable, But there was something sharper beneath the surface now, something that felt like a shift rather than a continuation. Being seen, he answered, and the simplicity of it landed harder than anything else he could have said, because it made something inside me tighten, something I had not realized I had been protecting for a long time. Back in Brooklyn, being invisible had been safety, blending into crowded subway cars, keeping your head down, not drawing attention you could not afford. And now he was telling me the opposite, that here, being seen was not a risk, it was a necessity, and I was not sure which version of that was more dangerous. I thought nothing was safer, I said quietly, not accusing, just repeating his own words back to him, testing them, trying to understand where the truth actually lived. A brief silence followed, thinner this time, more focused, and Adrian stepped further into the room, closing the distance between us by a few feet, not enough to feel close, but enough to feel deliberate. To them, he said, his voice lower now, more precise, you are nothing. The way he said them made it clear he was not talking about himself, and that distinction mattered more than I expected it to. But here, he continued, his gaze steady, you are my wife. The words settled between us differently than before, heavier now, less like a transaction and more like a title I did not know how to carry yet. And I felt the weight of it in the way my shoulders straightened slightly without meaning to, in the way my mind immediately started trying to understand what that meant in a world like his. And that changes things, he added, almost as an afterthought, but I knew it was anything but. I let out a slow breath, nodding once, not because I fully understood, but because I was beginning to see the outline of something larger than myself, something I had stepped into the moment I said yes, without realizing the shape it would take. So I am nothing out there, I said, gesturing vaguely toward the world beyond the walls, and something in here. Adrian did not correct me. He did not soften it. He simply held my gaze and said, you are exactly what you need to be, depending on who is looking. The answer was not comforting, but it was honest, and I was starting to realize that honesty from him came in forms that did not always feel kind, but were always deliberate. I picked up the fork again, finishing a small bite as I processed his words. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not exactly, but awareness, a quiet understanding that this was not just about surviving his world, it was about learning how to exist in it without losing myself completely. Adrian watched me for another second before turning slightly toward the hallway, his attention already moving ahead to something else, something beyond this room. But just before he stepped away, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder in a way that felt almost instinctive. Do not wander too far today, he said, not as a command, but not entirely a suggestion either. And then he was gone, leaving behind a silence that felt different now, less suffocating, more defined, like I had just been given a piece of a map without knowing where the rest of it led. And as I sat there in a house that no longer felt entirely foreign, I realized something that made my grip tighten slightly around the fork. I was no longer just reacting to this world. I was starting to learn how to move inside it. By the afternoon, the house no longer felt silent in the same way. It felt watchful, like it had accepted my presence but had not yet decided what to do with it. And I found myself moving through it more slowly, more deliberately, aware of every step, every glance, every reflection in polished surfaces that reminded me I was still being observed even when I could not see who was watching. And yet there was something else now too, something quieter beneath the tension, a strange sense of space opening up around me, as if the rules were not as rigid as they first appeared, as if they were waiting for me to test them. I stopped at the top of a wide staircase that curved down into the main living area, my hand resting lightly on the smooth railing as I looked out over the room below. Sunlight pouring in through floor-to-ceiling windows and catching on glass and metal in a way that made everything feel almost unreal, like a place designed to impress rather than to live in. And I wondered how many people had stood exactly where I was standing now, trying to understand what it meant to belong here. The answer, I was starting to realize, was not something anyone would ever give me directly. I had to learn it piece by piece. I took a step down, then another, my movements slower than necessary but intentional, and halfway down I heard voices, low, controlled, coming from a room just off to the right, and instinctively I paused, not out of fear exactly, but out of awareness, because I knew enough now to recognize that information in this house was not something you were meant to overhear. It was something you were meant to be given, and only when it served a purpose. I should have kept walking. I knew that, but I did not. I stayed still, just long enough to catch a few words, not enough to understand everything, but enough to feel the weight behind them. My name, his name, in a tone that did not belong to casual conversation. My chest tightened slightly, not from panic, but from realization, because whatever this was, it was not separate from me. It was connected, tied to the decision that had brought me here, to the role I had stepped into without fully understanding it. I moved again before I could think too much about it, continuing down the stairs and into the open space like I had not heard anything at all, like I did not know that behind one of those closed doors, conversations were happening that would shape what came next. The moment I stepped fully into the room, the voices stopped. Not faded, not lowered. Stopped. And that told me everything I needed to know. Adrian stood near the far side of the room, one hand resting on the back of a chair, his posture relaxed but his attention sharp, focused entirely on me in a way that made the space between us feel smaller than it was. And beside him, another man I had not seen before, taller, broader, his expression unreadable, but his eyes assessing, quick, like he was trying to understand something about me without asking. I held my ground, even though every instinct told me to step back, to retreat, because something about this moment felt like a test, not just of me, but of how I would choose to respond when the rules were not clearly stated. Am I interrupting? I asked, my voice calm, steady, even as my pulse picked up just slightly, and Adrian's gaze did not waver, did not soften. But there was a shift there, subtle, almost imperceptible, like he was recalibrating something in real time. No, he said after a second, his tone even, but there was something deliberate in the way he stepped forward, closing the distance between us just enough to change the dynamic of the room. You are exactly where you should be. The words settled into me in a way I did not expect, not comforting, not reassuring, but anchoring, like a statement of position rather than permission, and I nodded once, acknowledging it without fully understanding it. The other man watched the exchange closely, his attention moving between us, and after a moment, he gave a slight nod, almost respectful, though I did not know why. So this is her, he said, his voice low, measured, not unkind but not warm either, and I felt something shift again, not in the room this time, but in the way I was being seen, not as a stranger, not as an outsider, but as something that carried weight, even if I did not yet understand what that weight meant. Adrian did not respond immediately, his gaze still on me, steady, calculating, and then, quietly, almost under his breath, he said, yes. Just one word. But the way he said it, calm, certain, final, made something inside me still completely, because it was not just confirmation, it was ownership of a decision he had already made, a decision that now included me whether I was ready for it or not. And as I stood there in a room that suddenly felt much larger and much more complicated than it had a few seconds ago, I realized that whatever I had stepped into, whatever role I was beginning to understand, it was no longer just about survival. It was about being recognized. And in this world, recognition came with consequences I had only just begun to see. The man did not introduce himself, and somehow that felt intentional, like names were privileges here, not formalities, and I stood there with the weight of his attention on me, steady and measured, while Adrian remained just close enough to shift the balance of the room, without saying another word. And I realized then that whatever this moment was, it was not about conversation, it was about placement, about where I stood and how I chose to hold that space. I did not look away, not from the stranger, not from Adrian, not from the quiet tension that had settled into the air like something waiting to be acknowledged, and after a few seconds that felt longer than they should have, the man gave a slight nod again, almost thoughtful this time, like he had reached a conclusion I was not part of. You did not tell me she would walk in like that, he said, his voice calm. But there was something underneath it, not disapproval, not quite surprise, more like interest sharpened by caution, and I felt my shoulders straighten just slightly at the way he spoke about me, like I was both present and not entirely included in the conversation. Adrian's response came slower than I expected, not rushed, not defensive, just precise. I did not expect her to, he said, and for a fraction of a second, His eyes flickered toward me again, that same unreadable look, but there was something else in it now, something that felt less like calculation and more like acknowledgement, like I had done something he had not planned for. I folded my arms loosely, grounding myself again, refusing to shrink under the weight of their attention, because if this world required me to be seen, then I needed to learn how to stand in that without losing the parts of myself that still felt real. Is there something I should know? I asked, my voice even, not challenging, not passive, just present, and the question shifted the room in a way I could feel immediately, subtle but real, like I had stepped into a space that was not originally meant for me, but had decided to stay anyway. The man's gaze sharpened slightly, his attention fully on me now, and for a moment I thought he might answer. But instead he glanced at Adrian, a silent exchange passing between them that I could not read, but could definitely feel, and that silence told me more than any words would have, that whatever was happening here was layered, controlled, and not something I would be given freely. Adrian stepped forward then, just enough to close the gap between us, not touching, not invading, but present in a way that felt deliberate. And when he spoke, his voice was calm, steady, but there was a weight behind it that made every word land harder. "Not yet," he said, and that was it. Two simple words that carried more meaning than a full explanation ever could, because it meant there was something to know, something waiting, something that would come whether I was ready for it or not. I held his gaze for a second longer, searching for something in his expression, some hint of what was coming, but all I found was that same controlled stillness, that same sense that he had already thought 3 steps ahead and was waiting for the moment to catch up. The other man exhaled softly, almost amused, though the sound did not reach his eyes, and he took a small step back, giving space without truly leaving, like he was choosing to observe rather than engage. "She is different," he said quietly, not to me, not entirely to Adrian either, more like a statement placed into the room itself, and I felt that word settle in a place I was not sure I liked, because different in a world like this could mean many things, none of them simple. Adrian did not deny it. He did not confirm it either, but his silence felt heavier this time, more intentional, like he was choosing not to define something that had not fully revealed itself yet. I let out a slow breath, my fingers tightening slightly against my arms before relaxing again, and I realized something in that moment that shifted everything just a little more. I was no longer just reacting to what they said or did. I was starting to understand the spaces between their words, the things they chose not to explain, and that understanding came with its own kind of power, quiet but real. "Then I suppose I will find out eventually," I said, not as a question, not even as a challenge, just as a fact I was beginning to accept, and Adrian's gaze held mine again, steady, unflinching, and for the first time since I had met him, there was something there that looked almost like agreement. "Yes," he said softly, and the simplicity of it made something inside me settle, not completely, not comfortably, but enough to understand that whatever came next, whatever truth was waiting behind all of this, it was not going to stay hidden for long, and when it surfaced, it would change everything again. The room did not return to normal after that, not really, because once something shifts in a space like this, it does not simply reset, it lingers, settles into the air like a quiet echo that follows every movement, and I could feel it even as the conversation seemed to end, even as the man gave one last look in my direction before turning away, his steps measured, unhurried, like he had seen enough for now and did not need to say anything more to confirm whatever conclusion he had already reached. Adrian did not move immediately after the man left, and neither did I, the distance between us holding something unspoken, something that had changed without either of us fully acknowledging it yet. And for the first time, the silence did not feel like a barrier. It felt like something we were both standing inside, trying to understand from different sides. "You were listening," Adrian said finally, his voice calm but precise, and it was not a question, just an observation placed carefully between us, and I exhaled slowly, not denying it, because there was no point pretending. In a place where everything seemed to be seen anyway. I heard my name. I replied, my tone steady, matching his, and his gaze sharpened slightly at that. Not in anger, not in warning, just in recognition of the fact that something had crossed a line, even if that line had not been clearly drawn for me. "And you stayed," he added, and there was a pause after it, just enough to make the statement feel heavier, like he was waiting to see how I would explain it, how I would justify it, or if I would even try. I met his eyes, holding that space again, because I was beginning to understand that hesitation here could be mistaken for weakness, and that was something I could not afford, not now, not when I was still learning how to stand in this world without losing myself entirely. I am not invisible here, I said quietly, repeating his own lesson back to him, and something in his expression shifted again, subtle but real, like he had not expected me to use his words as a foundation instead of a boundary. The silence that followed was different this time, less tense, more focused, like we had both stepped into the same understanding without needing to say it out loud. Adrian moved then, slowly, circling slightly so that he was no longer directly in front of me, but just to the side, close enough that I could feel the change in space, the quiet shift in control, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower, more deliberate. "There are things you will hear in this house," he said, "and not all of them are meant for you." The words were not harsh, but they carried weight, the kind that settled into your chest and stayed there, and I nodded once, not because I agreed completely, but because I understood the truth inside them. "And there are things that are," I replied, my voice softer now, but not uncertain, and that made him pause, just for a second, long enough for me to notice, long enough to realize that I was no longer just following the lines he said. I was starting to draw some of my own. His gaze held mine again, steady, unreadable, but there was something else there now, something that looked less like control and more like consideration, like he was recalculating not just the situation, but me, what I was capable of, how far I might go once I understood the rules completely. "You are learning quickly," he said, and it was not praise, not exactly, but it was acknowledgement, and in this place, that felt like something rare, something earned rather than given. I let out a slow breath, the tension in my shoulders easing just slightly, not because things were simpler, but because they were becoming clearer, and clarity, even in a world like this, was a form of stability. "I do not think I have a choice," I said, and for a moment, something almost like understanding passed between us, quiet and unspoken, but real enough to feel. Adrian glanced toward the hallway where the man had disappeared, then back at me, and whatever he saw seemed to settle into a decision I was not part of, not yet. "You will," he said finally, his voice steady, certain, but not today. The way he said it made something inside me tighten, not with fear, but with anticipation, because it meant there was a moment coming, something waiting just beyond what I could see, something that would require more than observation, more than quiet understanding. It would require a decision. And as I stood there, no longer just a stranger in his house, but not yet fully part of his world, I realized that whatever that moment was, it would not ask me who I had been before all of this. It would ask me who I was willing to become. The rest of the day passed in a quiet that no longer felt accidental. It felt like a build-up, like something was aligning just out of sight, and I moved through the house with a growing awareness that every step I took now carried more weight than before, not because anyone was stopping me, but because I was starting to understand that being allowed to move freely here did not mean I was unseen. It meant I was being trusted to reveal who I was without being forced. By early evening, the light outside had shifted into that soft gold that makes everything look calmer than it really is, and I found myself drawn back to the large windows in the main living area, my reflection faint against the glass as I watched the long driveway stretch into the distance, empty but not abandoned, like it was waiting for something to arrive. I did not know how long I stood there before I heard him again, the quiet sound of footsteps that I was beginning to recognize without needing to turn, steady, controlled, always measured, and when Adrian stopped beside me, he did not speak right away. He simply stood there, looking out at the same view, like whatever he was about to say required the right kind of silence first. "They will come tomorrow," he said finally, his voice low, even, and the words settled into me instantly, heavier than anything he had said so far, because they carried certainty, not possibility. I turned slightly, studying his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the stillness in his posture, and for the first time, I noticed something I had missed before, not weakness, not hesitation, but tension, controlled so tightly it almost disappeared, but not completely. "Who?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer would not be simple. Adrian's gaze remained fixed ahead, his expression unreadable, but his voice shifted just slightly, enough to make the words feel more precise. "People who need to see you," he said, and that was when it clicked, not all at once, but enough to understand the direction this was heading, enough to feel the ground shift beneath me in a way that was no longer subtle. "So this is not just about being here," I said slowly, my voice quieter now, more focused. "It is about being seen by the right people." He turned his head then, his eyes meeting mine, and there it was again, that look, not cold, not distant, something sharper, more deliberate, like he was measuring how much I understood and how much I was ready for. "Yes," he said simply, and that one word carried everything the rest of the conversation did not need to explain. I let out a slow breath, my thoughts racing ahead of me now, connecting pieces that had been scattered since the moment this began: the contract, the marriage, the silence, the way he had positioned me without ever fully explaining why. And for the first time, I saw the outline clearly, not the full picture, but enough to recognize its shape. "And what do I need to be when they see me?" I asked, not because I expected a script, but because I needed to understand the role I was being asked to step into, the version of myself that would exist in front of people who did not know me, who would only see what he allowed them to see. Adrian did not answer immediately, and that pause told me more than words could have, because it meant the answer was not simple, not fixed, not something he could hand to me like an instruction. "You need to be exactly what they cannot predict," he said finally, his voice steady. But there was something else beneath it now, something that felt less like control and more like expectation, like he was not just placing me into a role, he was waiting to see how I would define it. I held his gaze, feeling the weight of that settle into me, not as pressure, but as something sharper, something that required more than just compliance, more than just survival. And for the first time since this all began, I did not feel like I was standing at the edge of something I did not understand. I felt like I was stepping into it. "Then I guess we will both find out," I said quietly, and there was no hesitation in my voice this time, no uncertainty, just a calm acceptance of what was coming, and Adrian's expression shifted again, just slightly, enough for me to see it, recognition, not of who I had been, but of who I was becoming. He nodded once, a small movement, but deliberate, and as he turned away, his voice followed, low, certain, carrying something that felt like both a warning and a promise. "Tomorrow changes everything." And as I stood there watching the last of the sunlight fade from the glass, I realized he was right, not because of who would arrive, not because of what they would see, but because for the first time, I was not just part of his world, I was about to define my place in it.